Hello and welcome back to Autistic After Hours. I'm your host, Ashra. I'm really happy to be back. We skipped last week because instead of releasing a podcast episode, I released a travel vlog of mine and Nick's trip to Japan. So if you missed me last week and you haven't seen the Japan vlog yet, definitely go watch that. It is just on this same YouTube channel where my podcast is located. Also, reminder to follow Autistic After Hours wherever you're listening right now, whether that is on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. I also have an Instagram account for Autistic After Hours where we are almost at 70,000 followers. So if you want to join that community, be sure to follow at Autistic After Hours. Today, I wanted to talk about what my social struggles actually look like as somebody diagnosed level 1. I think a lot of times in media, we do not see people talk about the actual nuances and intricacies about how somebody who is high masking and who is diagnosed level 1 actually experiences the social struggles that come along with being autistic. Many people talk about the fact that they have social difficulties, but not a lot of people actually talk about the specifics of how those show up as somebody diagnosed level 1. Quick disclaimer, this episode is only about my experiences. So if you are somebody diagnosed level 1, or if you are just autistic, and regardless of what or how you've been diagnosed, if you do or do not relate, that is not reflective of your validity as an autistic person. We are all different. We all have different experiences. And if you feel differently from me, if you do not relate to this, whatever may be the case, you are still valid, and so am I. And so this is just me sharing my experiences, the ways that I experience social difficulties, the nuances and specifics of how my social difficulties show up as somebody who is high masking and who has been diagnosed autistic level 1. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. The first thing I want to start with is I have a lot of difficulty pretending to be interested in things that I'm not interested in. This shows up in my relationships a lot. This is a big difficulty when it comes to socializing and having conversations and connecting with other people, because a lot of conversations are based around small talk or are based around mutual sharing of interests. And this is an area where I struggle because I have a lot of difficulty pretending to be interested in things that I'm not interested in. And a lot of times that is small talk types of conversations. If I'm talking to somebody and they are asking me a lot of questions about how work has been, how things are, how my boyfriend's doing, like things like this, I would consider this all types of small talk conversations, because they're just about like general life things where it almost feels like you're being interviewed, or it almost feels like you're just trying to like catch people up on the day-to-day happenings of your life. This is the type of conversation I really struggle with, and a lot of conversations are like this. Basically, if I'm being super honest right now, I have a great difficulty with having any sort of conversations that are not about my interests, that are not about my special interests, which happen to be autism-related things, things about fragrances, and I also have a general interest in psychology, and so anything about analyzing people, anything about psychology, I will be happy and willing to talk about. But things outside of that are very difficult for me. And so if I am having a conversation with somebody and it's mostly small talk, mostly about the day-to-day happenings of our lives, or they are telling me about something they are interested in, I hate to say it, but I really struggle with all of these things, because as an autistic person, I have just a very hard time coming up with things to say when it comes to topics that I don't have a lot of knowledge or interest about. I think there are a lot of reasons for why this is difficult for me as an autistic person, and I'm not going to get into the details because this episode is meant to be more broadly about most or all of the ways that I struggle with socializing as an autistic person, so I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty with every example. But with this one in specific, I think part of it is because I, as an autistic person, have differences with my processing speed and also differences with my memory and the way that I store information. And so when conversations revolve around small talk or like day-to-day things, this is the type of memory stuff that I struggle with. If you ask me like, what did you do today? Me having to process that question and like come up with a concise answer for you about what I did today is really, really difficult for me for some like memory related reason that I honestly don't have the science to back up. I can just tell you that that's difficult for me for some reason. I do not know why. And I think this is anecdotally, it seems a common experience for autistic people. Whereas if you asked me to give you like a wealth of information about my special interest, that's where my memory will be really strong. But if you ask me like, oh, what'd you do today? Or like, how's the last week been for you? Like, what have you been up to? What have you been up to at work? What have you been up to? Like, how was your trip to Japan? Like, all of these questions, for some reason, which I can't fully explain, are very difficult for me to answer. It's because I think it relies on me like processing too much information on the spot. It would be so hard for me to come up with a full, concise response to a question like, how was your trip to Japan? Because it requires me to look back using a part of memory that feels difficult for me to access for some reason. And then on top of that, to summarize all of that into a concise response on the spot. And I think part of the struggle also here is that for a non-autistic person, maybe they would just give a quick reply like, oh, it was great, I had such an amazing time, and they would have like a few things they could bring up to bolster their response. But for me, I am very drawn to and focused on details. And so if I have to quickly summarize something on the spot, that's really hard for me because I'm very focused on details. And so it feels like an information overload, and it feels like a huge task for my brain to have to look back, like access my memory, think about everything that I did, and then come up with a concise response. It is a huge task for me. And so that is something I really struggle with. So basically, all of this is to say my first point, which is that one of the main ways that I struggle in socializing as an autistic person diagnosed level 1 is that I have a very difficult time faking interest or having conversations about things that are anything related to small talk, day-to-day things, anything where it's just like a quick recap of like, how was this for you? How's work been? How have you been doing? Like anything like this is very difficult for me and very draining. This brings me to my next point, which is that I very often forget to ask people questions. And I think this honestly may be one of the reasons why I feel so triggered by point 1 that I brought up, which is like having a difficult time doing small talk, having a difficult time pretending to be interested in things, because I very often will let the other person take control of the conversation because of masking and because I just feel awkward and don't know what to talk about. And because of that, they often will then ask me a lot of questions because it's standard, I think, often in non-autistic communication to ask people questions and like do a lot of small talk. So they will try to direct the conversation in that way. And because I am like taking the back seat, I feel almost like I'm being interviewed. And then to make things even worse, I forget to ask them questions. So the conversation just turns into me feeling like I'm being put under a microscope and they're asking me all of these questions about my life, and I feel really uncomfortable. I feel like it's a huge task to answer all of these questions. I feel like I'm not talking about anything that interests me, and it's very difficult. And this ties into the fact that I have a hard time talking about things I'm not interested in. The types of conversations or questions that I might be interested in a conversation are like talking about my special interests, like, do you like any perfumes? Have you tried any fragrances you like? What are your favorite smells? Can you rank your favorite smells? These are conversations and these are topics that not everyone wants to talk about. And so I know as someone who's high masking that I am not able to always ask these types of questions. And if I do, people will flag it and think that I'm approaching things in an odd way, and I feel difficulty doing that because I don't want people to judge me or I don't want people to be uncomfortable by me. And so I often, again, take the back seat, let other people direct the conversation, and that turns into them asking me all these small talk conversation topics that I'm totally not interested in. So it's like a lose-lose often. It feels like socializing is just very difficult for me. I have a hard time remembering to ask people questions because the types of questions that I want to ask are things that other people maybe aren't interested in talking about. And it's hard for me to remember to ask the types of small talk questions that most people want to talk about, like, how's your family? How's work? How's this been? What did you do today? Like, it's hard for me to remember to ask those questions because I genuinely, usually, it sounds so bad, but I often just don't have like an interest in those types of things, or it just doesn't occur to me to ask because it feels like unrelated somehow, or it feels like, what's the use of transferring that information? Like, it feels like talking for the sake of talking, and it's not like interesting. And I feel like it sounds bad or mean or wrong to say these things, but that's why I'm saying them out loud, because this is the truth of how I feel. And I think so many other autistic people feel this way, and not a lot of people want to admit it or actually talk about it. And so that's why I'm saying it out loud. I just have a hard time faking my interest, and that involves asking people small talk questions like, how are you? How is your family? How is work? I forget to ask these questions because it's just not intuitive for me to try and gather that information. I think another reason is because often people give like false responses to this, and that makes me even less interested. Like, if I knew someone was going to give me an honest response, like for example, when I'm talking to my best friend, I think I do sometimes remember to ask questions like this because I know she's going to be honest with me, and I know she's going to give me an actual answer, and I have a vested interest in her because she's my best friend. But with like most people, it's just difficult because I feel like I'm going to get the response of like, oh yeah, everyone's good, or like, I've been doing well. And that's just so dissatisfying. And so I think that's part of why I have such a lack of interest and a lack of drive to engage in these conversations, because I know that most of the time people are going to give me these fake sorts of responses, and I just don't want to follow that script. Another way that I struggle is that if given the opportunity, I will dominate conversation about my interests. And this can be difficult. This is something that shows up with my boyfriend, where he will notice that if we're talking about something I'm interested in, I will talk. I will talk. And then if he brings something up that he's interested in that I don't really have any interest in, where I mean to say, I want to clarify this, I have an interest in my boyfriend. And so if he's interested in something, I by proxy will have an interest in that because I'm interested in him. However, I'm not necessarily interested in the topic specifically that he's talking about, and so I may have difficulty getting into conversation about that because it feels like my brain just doesn't know what to say. And so when given the opportunity, I do tend to dominate conversation about my interests, and it will be very obvious to the other person that there is an imbalance where I'm talking so much about my interests and then they might bring something up and I am almost like clueless as to how to keep the conversation going. Another way that I struggle with socializing as an autistic person diagnosed level 1 is that I tend to be extremely analytical, and for this reason, I often will analyze people as my way of interacting or engaging with them, and this can make people uncomfortable. It can make people feel almost objectified, I think, which no one specifically said that to me, but after reflecting on my behaviors, I can see how that might feel that way for people, because sometimes in conversations, I will be very fixated on analyzing the person, analyzing their behaviors. Again, I have a very strong interest in psychology and in studying human behavior. I, for a time, would even sometimes try and diagnose people in my head with things if I thought they were like exhibiting ADHD behaviors, autistic behaviors, behaviors associated with personality disorders. And something I realized, which is bad, is that sometimes I would even tell people if I thought they should look into that, or if I thought they like met criteria for that, which I realize is a total crossing of boundaries and not something that I should just tell people, because it's not my place. I'm not qualified to do that. And not everyone wants that information. But this is a way that I struggle with socializing, because I don't always know when I shouldn't say something. I don't always know when I should be reciprocally interacting with somebody rather than analyzing them. And this is very difficult for me. It's very difficult for me to not hyper-analyze people, their behaviors, their actions, our dynamic. I get very deep in my mind with overanalyzing things, and I think this is due to my need for details. It's also due to hypervigilance, like feeling like I've missed social cues before. And so I'm very hypervigilant about analyzing and like overthinking almost everything because I don't want to miss something. I don't want to mess up. And so I analyze people because of that. But also because I'm very reliant on predictability, routine. And so I analyze people almost subconsciously because I'm trying to understand them. So I know that I can predict them so that it feels a little bit more easy for me to communicate with them if I have that understanding. But I realize that not everyone is comfortable with this level of analysis being conducted on them. And that is something that I've learned the hard way. People have said to me before, I feel like you're analyzing me. And they felt discomfort with it, and I've had to like back off. And I didn't realize in the moment that I was doing something that made them uncomfortable. But it's very hard for me to not immediately use that as my main way of engaging with people. Like if someone tells me something that they're struggling with, I will like really zone in on that and try to understand and analyze like everything about why they're struggling that way. And it may not be helpful for them for me to interact that way. Maybe they just wanted me to listen. Maybe they just wanted me to offer a piece of advice, anything, whatever it is. But I will like do research on what they're talking about. I will like take what they're talking about and be like, let's say someone told me they have like some sort of health issue, whatever. I will then analyze everything about that. I will do research on that health issue. I will send them paragraphs about what I've learned. I will like make it a fixation, and not everyone wants that. But that's what I mean. It's like that level of analysis, and it's like this need for information that I have, and it feels like I'm helping people in my point of view, but not everyone wants that. And some people do not find that helpful. So I've had to learn that. Another way that I struggle with socializing is that there are just constant misunderstandings for me on my end and on the other person's end. I am constantly misunderstanding people. I think this relates to my processing speed. On my neuropsych evaluation, they did find that my processing speed comparatively to my other scores on the test was low. This definitely shows up in my life. I need a lot of processing time, and so I often misunderstand people or like mishear them, or just am confused by the flow of the conversation, or it's moving too fast for me. This leads to a lot of misunderstandings. People also chronically misunderstand me because they misunderstand my tone. They misunderstand the actual point of what I'm saying. They misunderstand my body language. All the time this happens in conversations, in socializing, and this is a huge way that I struggle as an autistic person. Now, last but not least, and again, I just want to say that this was meant to be like broad, this episode, me talking about most or all of the ways that I struggle with socializing as an autistic person, but I recognize that there are probably lots of other ways that I'm just not remembering or not coming to mind for me right now. So though this episode was meant to be like me talking about the ways that I struggle as an autistic person diagnosed level 1, please understand that this is limited and there are probably lots of other things that I just didn't think to mention. But the last thing that came to mind for me right now is that I have a lot of difficulty talking about myself when it's not something that I could have prepared beforehand. So this ties in again to the first point, which is that I have a hard time talking about things I'm not interested in. So when people ask me small talk conversations about myself, I just have a lot of difficulty answering those questions because of the nature of the question, because of memory, because of processing speed, but also because I generally feel a level of discomfort that I can't fully explain when it comes to people like without warning asking me about myself. It makes me feel like I'm almost like exposed, or it feels like I'm giving information that feels private. And I think it's because sometimes when people put me on the spot and ask me questions that I didn't have time to prepare myself for, I feel like my brain will try to find something interesting to say because I don't want to let them down or make them bored. And for this reason, I feel like I'm giving information that like doesn't feel fully processed or doesn't feel even truthful sometimes. It's, I think, a form of masking or people pleasing where I'm like trying really hard to give them a good answer, but sometimes that answer isn't truthful or it doesn't feel truthful because I haven't fully processed even what they asked me and I'm just trying to come up with a good response. This also means that sometimes I overshare because I'm trying so hard to give a good answer. And so I want to pick something like interesting to tell them. Like if they're like, how have you been? I want to pick something interesting, like, oh, this happened, because I want to have something good to say, something that will keep them interested in the conversation. Sometimes that means before thinking, I might overshare something that I actually retroactively like didn't want to share or didn't want to say, but I shared it because they asked me a question that I didn't feel prepared to answer and that I, in the moment, can't come up with an actual answer for. And so I'm just trying to pick something that will interest them, you know? And for this reason, small talk type conversations often feel really exposing to me. They feel uncomfortable for so many reasons that I've mentioned in this episode. And one of them is because it feels like it prompts me to give information that I don't feel ready to give or haven't pre-planned giving, or I feel like I'm oversharing, giving private information because I don't know what to say. Hopefully this episode gives somewhat of a clearer picture of what the struggles of somebody diagnosed level 1 might look like, how they look for me. As I mentioned, there are probably a lot of other things that I struggle with that I just am forgetting to mention, but this is just the main things that came to mind when I think about my struggles as an autistic person. High masking, diagnosed level 1. Thank you so much for listening. That is all I have for you today. As always, remember, autistic adults exist. We deserve awareness, support, community, and acceptance, and I'm so grateful that you're here. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.